Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. And now is 14 weeks in TH490 Leadership in Ministry. So this week, I like to review from first lecture until last lecture in 13 weeks for the prepare about the final term, final exam. That's why today I like to pre-test everything from second lecture, second quiz until 13 quiz. And I like to explain about the first one is multiple choice, 15 question, and one question has the 2 point each question. That's why it's a multiple choice is a total 30 point. And also fill in the blank is only 5 question, and one question take a 2 point. That's why it's a total 10 point. And multiple choice is 30 point, and fill in the blank is a 10 point. It's a total 40 point. And last category is a short essay. It's just 3 topics, and you should take all topics, 3 topics, and each topic is a 20 point, and total 60 point for the short essay. And then total is 60 point plus 10 point plus 30 point is 100 point for the final term. And this week I like to review and also pre-test for the final term. That's why you should learn and listen about this lecture this week, and then I think you got the good point in final term this class. Okay, before start, I want you pray. Let me pray together. Heavenly Father, the spring semester of 2026 has begun already, and now we are looking for final exam, final week. Thank you for the grace you have kept so far, and give us wisdom and peace to the student who will take this exam and this class. Please be with us so that we take an exam what we know well, and our hope is to live according to what we know, what we learned. Please guide us to learn and do what we don't know. Help me to act as we know in our life. May Jesus Christ, who overcame death and risen, be our living hope. May we be able to serve our neighbors with grace or ability from Jesus Christ, who rise again from tomb. I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, so we're going to start for 14 lecture for pre-test for final exam. So I introduced already for start multiple choice 15 question. The first question, what is not the type of leadership required in sociology? So in leadership, what came from in sociology? So before, in not develop of sociology, and then we don't know that the leadership, we didn't research of the leadership. But in sociology is developed that maybe 17th century, 1600 something, and then the leadership is we research that in industry. And now the question is, what is not type of leadership required in sociology? And then you should be think about what is sociology and what concern about the sociology. The sociology is a society. They concern about the society in human thing, human being, and relationship, and how they can get the power of economy and develop of technology. That's why the question is, what is not the type of leadership required in sociology? First one is humanity is relate with the sociology. And third one is economic power is of course relate with the human beings. And technology is also society related. That's why it's in number two is diligence is independent on the individual humanity. That's why that is a correct answer is number two, diligence. That is not the type of leadership required in sociology. And number two, question two, what is not Fordism? So what is before we think about what is not Fordism, we should be think is what is Fordism. So Ford is the name of the manufacturer in auto industry in United States, General Ford. The General Ford, their factory, when they made a car in United States, they want to how efficient for achieve the productive. That's why Fordism is a concern about the increased productivity, how division of labor, and how feedback to the members' labors, low wages. That's why number one and number two and number four is relate with the Fordism. And now, finally, number three, scientific analysis is not relate with Fordism, because Fordism is in front of the automatic industry in United States. That's why it's not yet they concern about the scientific analysis. And first one is Fordism. After Fordism, that the Taylorism concern about the scientific analysis. That's why it's question three. What is the difference between Fordism and Taylorism? So between Fordism and Taylorism is not too much is difference, but just only one difference is assessment. So Fordism didn't have the assessment. They didn't have the self-assessment. But Taylorism concerned about the self-assessment through the scientific analysis and how they feed back to the members of organization to the incentive bonus. That's why it's production increase, division of labor, and time schedule and low wage is the same as the Fordism and Taylorism. But different thing is the scientific analysis, and then incentive bonus is Taylorism. The first one is traditional and in sociology. Where came from the leadership and what is the concept of the leadership in sociology? And second question and third question is the real exactly what happened in the industry calling for the Fordism and Taylorism. This is very practical leadership. And question four, what is not the leadership in Jesus? That is the ministry. What is not the leadership of Jesus Christ? And then we can guess opposite the question, what is the leadership of Jesus Christ? The Jesus Christ leadership should be accountability, that accountability can develop the trust each other, the God and human, and Jesus Christ and human and Holy Spirit. That's why the leadership of Jesus Christ should be accountability, and leader should be sacrifice. I think so we know that Robert Greenleaf, he said, what is the biblical leader? The biblical leader who their identity is the Christian and follow the God's will and law of the leader is the loving, not loving, is serving community with love and sacrifice. That's why the leadership of the Jesus is a sacrifice and communication by each other. That's why the right answer, not the leadership of Jesus Christ, is number 3, efficiency. So Jesus Christ doesn't care about the efficiency because the God has the authority and responsibility about the human beings. That's why the human leadership of the human cannot concern about efficiency. Efficiency depends on God or Jesus Christ. The question 4, right answer, is number 3, the efficiency. And number 5, what is not the leadership of Jesus? It's the same question. Okay, so number 4 and number 5 is a question regarding ministry, and number 3 and number 2 and question 2 and question 3, question about the practical leadership in industry, and question 1 is the concept and what is a historical leadership in sociology. As you can guess that the first one, concept, second, practical, and third one is a ministry in Christian ministry. And question 6, what is not Christian ministry? So every time you can guess about the opposite question, what is a Christian ministry? So Christian ministry is not concerned about efficiency regarding question number 4 and 5. Accountability and sacrifice and communication is very important in Christian ministry. That's why it's school prophet. School prophet is very important for the, how is present for the direction and educate to the young people, the student. That's why it's accountability relate with the accountability and communication. Hospital business, this is a business, but the hospital is a more keyword. Hospital is accountability and communication relate to that. And missionary work, and then so Christian ministry should be missionary work together. But government project sometimes relate with the Christian project, Christian ministry, but so normally government project is they concern about the ordinary people, not only religious people. That's why the right answer is number 4. About the question number 6, what is not a Christian ministry? Government project is the right answer. Okay, and then so question 7 about the Catholic Church. What is the position of a member of a committee that elect the chief officer in the Catholic Church? And then who is the chief officer in the Catholic Church? Pope, number 1. And then what the position? who was the committee that elected the Pope in the Catholic Church? You should memorize about the cardinal, not Pope. Pope is a chief officer, and bishop and priest is under of cardinal. So cardinal is a member of the committee. We call it the conclave. Conclave member is we call it the cardinal. So you should be memorized about the position of Catholic Church. And question 8, what was the early church called? So now we call the church normally, but at that time in early church era, they didn't call it church. And then how and what they called the church? So number 1, synagogue, and number 2, ecclesia, and number 3, tabernacle, and number 4 is oikonomos. And synagogue is only Jewish people, not the general people, not Gentile people. That's why synagogue is not early church called. That is only Jewish people and temples. Ecclesia is the, in early church era, they called as like a church. Not yet they called the church. Not generally, not normally don't use it at the church. And then before they use it at the ecclesia as like a church. That is the right answer. Tabernacle is the same as like a synagogue. The function is the same as like a synagogue. They worship to the God and they bring the offering to the priest in Jewish people, and they worship at the constructed structure in tabernacle. And oikonomos is a group, the Christian group or religious group. That's why it's question 8, right answer is number 2, ecclesia. And question 9, what does not match of the Protestant administration system? So we know that the Catholic Church, the member of the committee, the position, the Pope, Cardinal, Bishop, Priest. And now what is not match the Protestant administration system as a pastor, as like a Pope in a Catholic Church, and elders and deacon as a lay person in the modern church. The priest is the name of the position in Catholic Church. That's why it's question 9, what does not match of the Protestant administration system? As the right answer is number 3, priest. Question 10, what was the name of the region of the first church in the early church to be called Christian? As like a similar question in question 8, what was the early church called? Ecclesia. And then what region, what city they called the first church in the early church era? So from the Jerusalem, Egypt, Antioch, and Ecclesia. Ecclesia is the name of the church. And what is the name of the city? Jerusalem, Egypt, and Antioch. So in the Acts chapter 16, we found that the church of Antioch, region of Antioch, they called to the Christian first time Antioch church called to the Christian. That's why it's question 10, right answer number 3, Antioch. And question 11, what does SWOT have nothing to with? That means what does SWOT relate? Not related. The S means the strengthen. Is it right? W, what's the meaning of W? Is a weakness. And what is the meaning of what is the initial O is opportunity. But S is only strength and not situation. That's why it's question 11, right answer number 2, situation. And question 12, what is not the advantage of U theory's 5 stages of motivation? What is not the advantage? That means what is the disadvantage? What is the disadvantage of U theory? What is the advantage of U theory? The members become one unit. That is advantage. That is a positive. Leadership and members trust each other. That is a good advantage. That is positive portion for the U theory. A new start is possible with a new mind. That means the open mind, open heart, and open will. That's why the new start is possible in your theory. That's why the right answer is number 3. Members make personal sacrifice. That is a wrong answer. Because of course, the leadership should be love and sacrifice, but members not. Members achieve their goal and reward and compensation and incentive bonus, not personal sacrifice. That's why it's right answer number 3 about the question 12. And question 13, who is related with transformational leadership theory? So John Rawls. John Rawls, you didn't know that? I think so. But John Rawls is a very famous political analysis or politician. Not politician, he's a socialist, John Rawls. And Adam Smith, I think you know, he's an economist in England. And Robert Greenleaf is theologian. That's why it's Bernard Bass is the related transformational leadership theory. I think 13 weeks you should learn. And this should memorize in the question 13, right answer, Bernard Bass. And question 14, what is not the 3 steps of transformational leadership practice? The transformational leadership practice, the first step, recognize change. So the organization must be changed. That is recognized first. And second step, what part of the change? And then step to be part of change. And last one, third step, a step to sustain creative change. Yeah, as soon as after change the organization, and then temporary or some period must sustain change them. That's why the right answer is number 1, a step to ignore change. That is nothing to do for the develop, not modify that. That's why the question 14's right answer is number 1. And question 15, what methods are not appropriate for self-diagnosis in U theory? Self-diagnosis is a self-assessment, is the same meaning. And SWT, the self-assessment about the organization. And MBTI is a self-assessment and self-recognition about the individual. That is for the individual, and SWT for the organization, the grouping. And personal interview. For personal interview is a method, good method for the self-assessment. And then, therefore, right answer number 2, voting. Voting is not self-assessment. not good method. Okay, I finished the multiple choice 15 questions and 3 categories. First category is a general field. It's an ordinary field for leadership. And second, in practical leadership. And third one is the ministry field. The 3 categories, I check up the 3 categories through the multiple choice 15 question. And now is 5 question for the fill in the blank. And the first one is I like to emphasize for the theory of you. The theory of you has the 7 stage. First stage, and then now is you should know the 4 steps. And 5th step, motivation, strategy, and execution, we has already make a fill in the blank 4 step, holding the space, the first step, and second step is observations, and third step, you should feeling, sensing, and 4th step, presencing, and restart or reconfirmation, reaffirmation is presenting. And then you should blank, fill in the blank is holding the space, observation, and sensing, and presenting. Okay, 17 question is I had already talked to you, but the 3 steps, open mind, open heart, and open will. And then what are the 3 conditions for the spiritual leadership in the age of globalization? 3 steps. Open mind, that means the head, our knowledge, our sensitive image, open mind. And then we should hearing from outside or our partner, or my colleague, open mind in my head. And second step is the open heart. If you know that the information through the open mind with the head, and then that all information and what you know that going to my heart, emotionally, in compassion, and empathy and sympathy, with the empathy and sympathy. That's an open heart. And then open will means the integrate the mind and heart is motivated to act through my body. That's an open will. These 3 steps, 3 conditions for spiritual leadership in globalization. Because you should be open-minded, because the other ethnic or the other people can use that different language, and then you should very serious hearing attitude through the open mind, right? And then, so you and the other ethnic people has a different experience. That's why naturally different heart. But if you are the globalized leadership in spiritual, especially spiritual leadership, and then you should open your heart, right? That is the 3 conditions. It's very important in especially multi-ethnic society, or when you belong to international university or international company, international business, and then you should be in normal in the multi-ethnic society. And then 3 conditions: open mind in my head, open heart in my heart, and open will in my body, total my body. Okay, the 17th question. And 18, 19 to 20 is should be memorized for the keyword. What did the Talleyrand say? Talleyrand lived in 18th century in France. He said, I fear a group of 100 sheep led by one lion, more than a group of 100 led by lion or sheep. What is the keyword? One lion and one sheep. A lion or sheep is one lion and one sheep. Who will be fear the leadership? Of course, it's a lion. It doesn't matter how many sheep under the one lion. That is the very fear we feel today. There's a keyword, there's a fear, one lion or one sheep. Talleyrand said. That is ordinary leadership. In 19, what did Greenleaf say? There is a ministry leadership, Christian leadership. So Robert Greenleaf said, biblical leader. But Talleyrand said is a spiritual leader. But Greenleaf said biblical leader. What is identity? Is a steward who follow God's will. That is identity of a biblical leader. And what role? Take on the role of what is role? Is serving the community. How? With love and sacrifice. That is the biblical leader in ministry. Talleyrand said the ordinary leadership. And what did Wright say? Biblical leadership is a relationship with God and service. It is more religious than Greenleaf. The Robert Greenleaf said is a normal, widely Christian. But Wright say evangelical Christian is like a more missionary than Greenleaf. Biblical leadership is a relationship with God and service. More practical and more detailed. That is a keyword. The same as like a biblical leader and biblical leadership, but here there's a relationship with God and service is keyword. And the Greenleaf say keyword, steward, serving, or with love and sacrifice. That is a keyword. And Talleyrand's keyword, the fear, one lion or one sheep. Okay, now is I guess so you think about you worry about something for short essay, but I emphasize about your situation. You are the student of a university, and then first of all, when you get the information with your head, open mind, and then you felt you know already information, and then how you train that with your heart, and then how you do that with your mouth or your body. Just like same as like you are a student of university, and must be you should can explain about your mind, your heart with the writing, because you are a student. That's why it's open here. That's you use that the writing skill. Now is I suggest 3 topics, and every topics you briefly explain 5 sentences each topic. So how consists keyword and logical statement. First of all, you use that the keyword, and second, how you consist of your writing to make a logical statement. And I mentioned about the use of the AI. I allow the translation. It's okay. You can use that the translator. You can use that. I allow that. But if the entire sentence is assisted by AI, it will be treated as a 0 point. How do I know? Because I know that. I think I know and you know. You use that. You take assist by AI. So if you writing in your own language and then ask to AI for the develop and modify and more organized writing, ask to AI, and then AI can make that, I know. But that is a treat 0 point. Even you are very, how can I say, you are very unskilled logical statement, unskilled writing, but you try that, you train that, you willing to make by your own sentence, by your own thinking, on your handwriting, and then I want to give it to the point. The first of all, if you willing to by yourself or you assist by the AI, that is a very big difference after that, after this final short essay. Okay, so I like to I like to give you a chance for the by yourself on make your own writing. For example, first one, the asking describe about good and bad, about the leadership you have experienced. That is the question you should open mind. What is your question? The time is past because you have experienced. That is described. And then first sentence, I had some experience when, where, how, with who, what kind, something like that. That is explain what your situation the before. And second sentence, second paragraph, you explain what you had a real detailed experience with the leadership. And third sentence, finally, I think or I learned and I had experience with good leadership as like something, bad leadership as like something. That is a keyword. So I had experience what, where, how, where, who, with whom, something like that. That is the keyword. And second sentence keyword is the fact, how you had experienced that. And last conclusion, the final conclusion, and then what is good, you should be definition and define what is good leadership, what you have experienced. Okay, that is a past. And second category, if you want to become a leader, you can catch up that. This is in the future. If you to become a leader, what character would you need to develop or modify? And then, first of all, first sentence, who are you? I'm a hyper people, or I'm a very inside people, I'm very shy people, something like that. What is your character first? And what is a leader? What is leadership? Even my character something shy or hyper people. And conclusion, when I become a leader and then I should develop or I change that my characters, something like that, blah, blah, blah. That is a conclusion. Something like that. You understand? You follow me? So first category is past, and then described. Second question in the future, and then so you willing to change. And last question explain 2 or 3 difference between secular leadership and Christian leadership. That is not your opinion. That is not individual opinion. That is a fact because it explains. So what do you know? What is the definition of secular leadership? What is the definition in Christian leadership? What is a bad thing, good thing, and what is a bad thing and good thing Christian leadership and secular leadership? Compare. And then the first sentence, first paragraph is definition about the secular leadership and Christian leadership. And second paragraph or second sentence compare between secular and Christian leadership. And then finally conclusion, what happened and what relation with the secular and Christian leadership. Just only explain, not your opinion, not you can make decision, not you can make finalize, don't assessment, only explain what is difference. Okay, that's why it's a 3 category, different methodology, different thinking methodology. When you writing your essay, that is the good for the practice for you present your thinking and as like a university student. That is not so long, and now is a multiple choice and fill in the blank, maybe 3 pages, but this is short essay, maybe 1.5 page, so you can use that another page. Okay, and I hope and I pray for you have a good result and good grade for the final exam and good prepare just only 1 week. Okay, and thank you and good to see you next week for the final exam.